your source for everything paranormal. ParaX.
Throughout the ages, history has been altered by word of mouth and the misrepresentation of those who might not have been present when some of the world's most significant events took place. Channelers Barry and Connie Strom bring through the spirits of those who actually witnessed or took part in these historical events and lets them tell their stories in their own words. Welcome to Channeling History. And now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strom.
Good evening, everybody, and I would like to welcome you to Channeling History. We're the only show where we speak to the souls that made things happen. I'm Barry Strom, your host, and I'll be doing the channeling tonight.
And I'm Connie Strom, your co-host, and I would also like to welcome you to our show. Last week, we channeled Bob Hope, George Carlin, and Robin Williams and discussed current events. We thought they'd bring some humor to what's taking place today, but while some of their answers were humorous, many of their answers were quite serious. This very interesting show is available on our YouTube channel. It's in the name of Barry Strom and has over 660 videos at this time. Tonight, we're going to interview three of the greatest economists that ever lived: Adam Smith, John Maynard Keynes, and Milton Friedman. We'll be asking some very pointed questions concerning our modern world. The economy affects everyone, especially in the high inflation of the last couple of years. The more you understand about what's taking place today, the more you can prepare for tomorrow. We're currently consolidating all of our audio broadcasts on a new platform where you can download the audios or just listen to the shows. The address for Channeling History is channelinghistory.podbean.com. Tonight, please feel free to submit any questions through the chat room.
And we're going to do a short disclaimer before we begin our channeling. The opinions or statements voiced on our show are the channeled words of the spirits, do not necessarily reflect our opinions, those of the ParaX Network, or of our sponsors. Before we channel, we always say a prayer of protection. So, Connie, let's say the prayer, and we'll begin to channel with these wonderful guests tonight.
God, please grant us your wisdom and protection. Grant us the knowledge that we can handle and keep us safe from all things that will harm us. Keep the messages positive and pure love. Keep us safe from our egos. We ask these things in the light of the seen, the unseen, and the honesty of God. Amen.
Now, John Maynard Keynes was a British economist. He was born in 1883 and died in 1946. He led an entire school of economic thinking based on theoretical macroeconomics. His ideas on deficit spending and demand-supply models had a huge effect on modern economic policies.
Adam Smith was born in 1723 and died in 1790. He's considered the father of modern economics. He was the first free market capitalist and believed that the rational self-interest led to economic well-being.
Milton Friedman was born in 1912 and passed in 2006. He was an advocate of laissez-faire capitalism. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1976. He favored a free market economic system with minimal government intervention in social matters and especially school choice. I know when I was in college, we studied Friedman quite a bit. So, Connie, let's begin with our questions. And we're going to do this in roundtable format. So we'll be hearing from all three of our guests answering the same question.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen, for coming to share your wisdom with us. First question, what is your opinion of the Federal Reserve actions concerning interest rate management?
We'll start with Adam Smith. Well, obviously, in my time, we didn't have such a thing as a Federal Reserve. We really didn't have much of anything, and I thought that it would be a good place for me to study and to think and to try to help our country. I was Scottish, and I lived in Great Britain. So at that time, we were the economic powerhouse of the world. In my opinion, the Federal Reserve is a situation that should be closely regulated. I believe that the Federal Reserve has too much power, and as I watch from over here, I believe that they are becoming more of a political tool. If indeed the Federal Reserve could remain neutral, study the economies of the world, and do what is best for the country, then they could be a good thing. But I believe that at the current time, their political motivations are creating problems for the world. Mr. Friedman, when I was alive, it was a great thing, supposedly, that the Federal Reserve existed. They would raise and lower interest rates. Generally, they would do it either too early, too late, hold the rates too long, harm the economy, raise the rates too high. But, yes, as Adam said, they did. There was definitely a time and place for them. The problem is today that everything has become political. There is no time that even the most honest individual watching could say that the Federal Reserve is not without political problems. Today, I think you are seeing a major mistake being made by them. I believe that they held the interest rates high for too long. And when that takes place, there's a good chance that you can propel the economy into a recession. Today, when you see economic results and returns, there are so many lies in them that you really cannot believe the statistics. The government tells you what they want you to hear and to what they want you to believe. What is needed today is a truly independent bureau that keeps track of all of the economic data in a non-biased fashion. Today, you are seeing many things that are misstated. Mr. Keynes. I must agree with my two friends as they're speaking about the Federal Reserve. It would have great potential, but I think that the inability of the political parties to cooperate has created a situation that has endangered the effectiveness of the Federal Reserve. For instance, there is a presidential election coming in November. And do you think that possibly it is just a coincidence that the inevitable rate cut will take place in September, right before the election? I believe that this rate cut should have taken place at an earlier time, but it will look much better if the interest rate is lowered previous to the presidential election taking place. The Federal Reserve can be a great thing, but I believe that it takes legislation to gain control over the agency and assure a neutrality in their decisions.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, what would each of you do to combat the current rapid rise in the inflation rate?
Mr. Smith, in my time, inflation was something we really didn't recognize. We knew when things got more expensive, but it was pure supply and demand. If there was plenty of supply, then generally prices came down. If there was a lot of demand, prices went up. Today, we need to have the Federal Reserve absolutely remain neutral. Is it possible? Probably not. But perhaps if it cannot be remain neutral, some other type of mechanism should be designed to assure the neutrality. Mr. Keynes. Somebody has got to maintain some type of neutral control over the incredibly complex world economy that takes place today. Today it is done through the manipulation of currencies. It is done through manipulation of interest rates. The market can be flooded with printing money supply, and that can overcome the effect of the Federal Reserve. Everything should be coordinated. Perhaps the answer lies in the concept of supercomputerization. I would think that you're approaching the time that all of the changing situations and statistics could be analyzed by a computer, and that what is best could be determined and be free of such manipulations. Mr. Friedman. I truly wish that the Federal Reserve could function as an independent agency. Today, it is everything today. Excuse me. Today, everything is politically oriented. I don't believe in the government today that there is anything that is truly based on what's best for the people. I do believe that in the future, computerization will be used to make decisions, although it is being used today. The question is, garbage in is garbage out. I think the real question is how you get realistic statistics in order to use what is being given.
Okay, one of our listeners would like to know, is there ever a time when a person should consider cashing out their annuities and retirement accounts? Sometimes things look very scary and bleak to her.
Mr. Friedman, you are going through one of those times. Whenever you have uncertainties, you have volatility. But what you have to look at is the long term. In general, the standard indexes have risen through the years. There are crashes and there are booms. If you are investing for the long term, then you are probably best served by using indexes. The average individual is generally incapable of long-term stock selection. Today, the professional traders manipulate the market by large volume trades, and the average investor has no way of knowing what is taking place. The best defense is a long-term strategy where you invest in the indexes. If you look at the graphs over the long haul, you will see that that probably generates the best long-term returns for you, and in many instances is the best way to go. Mr. Smith. For retirement funds, I would take a look at the long term and the lowest risk. In general, high-grade bonds create the greatest stability. But, as you know, there is movement in the value of bonds as there is movement in the interest rates on which they pay. If you are a long-term investor, you should buy your bonds when the interest rates are high and lock in your high rate of return. You do know that in the future there will be a time that the bond will change value, but you are assured in the rate of return. Annuities can be a good or a bad thing. I think that U.S. Treasuries represent a better long-term investment for security than you would find in annuities. Okay, next.
Okay, what do each of you see as the future of the world economics, or economies, I'm sorry?
That, Mr. Friedman, that is very difficult to ascertain. There are so many intangibles in the world today. The wars offer great uncertainty. The tariffs that become the result of wars affect world economies. The fluctuation in values of currencies can be extreme. In general, the world economies should prosper into the future. There will be ups and there will be downs in the world markets. If you are situated in conservative investments, you should basically try to maintain your long-term positions and not get involved in the day-to-day market fluctuations. Mr. Keynes. The success of the world economies in the long run will be dependent on the amount of governmental interventions that take place facing these world economies. For instance, the introduction of high tariffs can be very harmful for world trade. They can create inflation. They can create increases in product prices, and they can create demand problems. As I watch from over here, I have come to the conclusion that the least government intervention is absolutely the best way for future economies to prosper. Mr. Smith, I still firmly believe that government should not interfere with trade. The markets are generally very effective in creating in their own levels, and the less governments interfere, the better the opportunity for those world markets to establish themselves and to find the proper levels. All government intervention does is interfere with free trade. Supply and demand is still the best overall policy. Mr. Keynes, the way governments control their own economies will have an incredible influence on the future. The United States has chosen to increase the national debt to levels beyond which they, in all probability, will be able to repay. The dollar has always been the foundation of stability in the world. Governmental actions will disturb the stability of the dollar. Perhaps it will even be replaced as the world mechanism of trade. China is trying to establish yuan as the currency to trade. Russia would love to see the ruble, but there's no hope of that. The strongest economies in the world will determine what happens in the long term. If an economy that is not friendly with the democracies of the world becomes the most important economic power, it will have great control over the rest of the world economies. So if the countries of the world learn to coexist and get along and to trade in peace, then the economies of the world will prosper. If belligerency is the key to future world practices, then the world economies will probably fail in the future. In the end, it is up to the decisions that are made by the governments.
Today, there are countries drawing away from using the dollar as its main currency. What do you see as the future for the dollar?
Mr. Smith, the United States governments of the past 20 years have done their best to destroy the value of the dollar. The dollar is no longer backed by gold or any solid asset. It is based on the stability. The value of the dollar is based on the stability of the United States. The political parties have chosen to destroy the stability through a huge national debt. You are seeing an amazing amount of the income of the United States going to simply pay for the interest on the monies that have been spent in the past. I believe that the future only has problems for the dollar. Mr. Keynes. Undoubtedly, the national debt creates the greatest risk to the stability of the government and the financial rankings of the United States. There will be a time that there will be downgrades in the economic quality of the United States if they keep raising the debt as is taking place. When you reach the point that most of your income is going to service your debt, then you reach a point where monies are not available for other things such as defense, rebuilding infrastructure, and all of the other projects that the government should be doing. Couple that with a large bureaucracy whose salaries have to be paid, and you will truly find economic problems ahead. Mr. Friedman. As my colleagues have said, the national debt represents an incredible problem for the United States. Another problem that they will have to face is how they have destroyed the fund for social services or social security. There are many people that have paid in through the years only to have the funds that they paid in dispersed for other projects that the government thought more valuable. Today, your politicians do not have the guts to face the problems that they've created. You have people in government that have been there for 30 years plus, so they have been part of the problems that have been created. But you do not see any of them stepping forward to try to solve the problems that they've created. Perhaps a younger generation of politicians that have a better understanding, that have less of a need for personal power and for personal wealth, will be elected, and those will be the key to the government succeeding into the future.
What long-term impact do you see resulting from the huge national debt of the United States?
Mr. Smith, when I lived, people simply did not spend more money than what they made. We had debtors' prisons where people that ran debts and could not pay the interest were put in jail. And obviously, once they went into these debtor prisons, there was no way that they could repay. Perhaps the answers today would be to put your politicians into a debtor's prison. And they would understand that what they've done to the United States by running this huge national debt is so devastating. Mr. Keynes, I do totally agree that the national debt is an incredible problem that must be addressed. Politicians have seem to have no interest in trying to solve the problem. It was really not that long ago when you had balanced budgets in the United States, and it would still be very possible to do that. What complicates it today is the great inflation. Inflation is truly taxation without representation, because your disposable incomes are lowered because everything costs much more money. The necessities are where you must put your priority money, and if there is nothing left, there is no disposable income. The consumer is the driving force in any economy. When the consumer does not have the money to consume, then the economy is truly in trouble. The current deficits are unsustainable. It will destroy the economic status of the country, and it will certainly create problems that the politicians have not understood. Mr. Friedman, the insanity of what is taking place in the government is a driving factor that can undermine the entire economic structure of the United States. The economy of the United States is the strongest in the world. It has great capabilities. It has the ability to bring in incredible amounts of income for the central government. But the central government must learn to use those monies wisely. Today, each politician tries to take as much money back to its own district as possible so that they can sustain their electability, so that they can show that they have accomplished something. It would be a wonderful thing if each politician would understand that only in balancing the budget can you stop the increase in the national debt. But keep in mind that simply balancing the budget does not reduce the national debt. They have to invest wisely in the funds available. They have to close loopholes in the tax system. No corporation should be allowed to get away with not paying taxes. Some of the most profitable corporations today have gained that profitability by not having taxes to pay. There has to be a great equality in the payment of taxes. You have to take in more than you spend in order to reduce the debt. Every household in the country understands that. Many of the individuals have been forced to borrow monies and to use credit cards and do all of the things to get cash in order just to pay their bills. They truly understand how difficult it is to pay back that debt. It will not be until the Federal Reserve and the politicians understand the need for balanced budgets.
Do you see any country in the world overtaking the United States in economic power?
Mr. Keynes. Today, the economy of China is actually approaching the size of the economy of the United States. But keep in mind that they have well over 1 billion people in their country. The United States has over 300 million in its country. So if you base it on a per capita basis, you will find that the standard of living in China is so much lower, and their average incomes are so much lower. But the government of China has no problem with diverting money away from the citizens and putting it into resources that generate income for China. The great risk, I believe, at this stage is China in the long term. They do have economic problems because it is difficult to feed over 1 billion people. They have limited resources, and at this time they are spending much money on their military. If the Chinese government learns the lesson of taking care of their people and making them prosper, the government will prosper as well. So I feel that China is probably the greatest economic system to take over control of the economic power in the world. Mr. Friedman. India is a country that has incredible opportunities and abilities. They have a huge population base. And as long as the government remains positive towards the other world economies, does not become more socialistic or communist, and allows the economic engine that they have available to them to prosper, then India has the ability to become the largest economy 20, 30 years in the future. They have to control their pollution, and they have to be able to maintain a steady inflow, reliable inflow of energy, of raw materials, and what they need for their people to prosper. China has great abilities, but I believe that their government, their system of government, will undermine their potential into the future. If the government changes into a more democratic system, then I believe that China could truly be the largest economy coming into the future along with India. Mr. Smith. As my colleague stated, I believe that those two economies have the greatest potential into the future. Many of the great democracies are basically limited by the size of their countries and the number of people that they can support in their populations. China and India have problems to overcome, but I do believe that they are capable of becoming the largest economies. The United States should, in all probability, remain as the largest economy in the world. The dynamics of a democratic society have the capability to let each individual rise to their own ability level and create businesses that will drive the economies. Sadly, the government is making decisions that are controlling the economic growth. If the government continues to print money and create inflation and let the national debt continue to spiral out of control, then there will be forces that will limit the capabilities of the United States to continue its great economic engine and its great economic growth.
Today, tariffs are used as economic weapons. What do each of you see as the relationship between tariffs and economic growth?
Mr. Smith. In my time, tariffs simply took the form of taxation. The British Crown had the power to tax all of the subsidiary countries to raise monies. Today, tariffs are used as economic weapons. They are used as a method to bring about equality, so to speak. There are many countries in the world where the prevailing wage rate is very low. In the United States, the wage rates are very high in comparison to many of the other countries. Inflation drives salaries, and as the salaries increase, then it becomes very difficult. That is where the governments look to tariffs against countries with lower standard of living and lower prevailing rates for labor. Tariffs are used in those instances to create inequality. But they also interfere with supply and demand. I believe that economic stability is obtained through a freer type of trade. There are times that tariffs can work, but that is not the majority of times. Mr. Keynes. Tariffs interfere with the true balance of supply and demand. Today, tariffs are used as political weapons. It is a way to destroy a country without having to go to war with them. If you place a tariff on a country, you can completely destroy their economic system. It all depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Today, if you would like free trade, then competition should determine what wages can be paid and how the trade will take place. I do believe that there's a time that tariffs can be used as economic weapons instead of using military power. But by and all, if you want free trade, then tariffs should not be used. Mr. Friedman. The current generation has seen the use of tariffs in many, many ways. Businesses have taken their employees to countries where there are low wage rates and they use the local labor. Those countries now become better positioned to compete with countries of higher wage rates. So today you see the fact that often tariffs are placed against those countries to create inequality. As long as there are different government types, such as communism and socialism, and places and dictatorships, there are countries where free trade does not exist. Supply and demand does not determine the wage level. And there are great inequalities that take place in trade between the countries and the free democracies. As the free democracies have higher standards of living, the inequalities increase with those countries, with those dictatorships, with those communist nations. Tariffs can help to create equality in trade, but there are many, many trade-offs. Those tariffs create animosities that can create essentially wars between countries. And those tariffs are only temporary protections. The true answer lies in a world where all economies are on an equal footing. They bring about a situation where all people gain a type of equality in standard of living. If that was true, there would be no need for tariffs.
Do each of you think that an economic system based on large government and social benefits can survive in the long run?
Mr. Smith. When I lived, there were basically no social benefits. The poor were on the streets, and the rich lived in lavish homes. There were times that the inequalities would lead to revolution. The people need to establish a place, an economic system, where the people are living independent lives, and that they are responsible for their own standards of living. It is a misconception to believe that individuals can rely on government and not on working for their own betterments. Governmental systems such as communism or socialism will not work in the long run because it is based on relying upon governmental structures, and those governmental structures have free will over how the individuals live. I do not believe that any society that relies on a large government and social benefits can exist in the long run. Mr. Keynes. The interrelationship of the long and short run shows just the infallacy of reliance upon large government, and social-oriented governments. I do believe that there should be safety nets for people. A large or any prosperous government should have funds available so that a large government needs to maintain a populace that supports them. If a government is totally in charge of the people, you will find that the people have lost their freedoms. Individuals cannot have a wide range of freedoms and rely upon a large governmental structure. Mr. Friedman. Large government is indeed the enemy of personal freedoms. Large and powerful governments want the individuals to rely upon that governmental structure. The more individuals rely upon that governmental structure, the less say that they have in their own lives. It is possible to reach a point where there are individuals that totally rely on the government for support. If an individual reaches a point that he does not feel that he needs to work or to be self-reliant, then you will see a breakdown in social structure. Today you have a huge governmental structure in the United States. And as you create more bureaucracy, those bureaucracies exert their influence in many new and varied ways. For instance, you lose much of your individual discretion, and you lose the ability to make many decisions concerning your own personal life. So huge governments are not in the long-term interest of any country.
As inflation increases, the disposable income diminishes and the demand for higher wages and salaries increases. How would each of you solve this inflationary problem?
Mr. Smith. In my mind, you simply need to begin by getting some of the government decisions taken away from them. Allow the free markets to work. Allow supply and demand to work. Let the interest rate be determined by demand. Today, the government is doing many things. By printing money, they are encouraging inflation. A huge money supply encourages individuals to pay more money. If the money is available because the government has printed it, then many problems occur. If our debt was tied to an object such as how much gold you had as backing, then you would be limited into how much you could increase your debt because you would only have so much backing for that debt. You have to increase disposable income for the people. High taxation takes away disposable income. The government has created most of its own problems, but that is the result of what you get when you have a huge governmental structure. Mr. Keynes. People will respond to wise financial management. Today, the inflation is taking away the purchasing power of the average person. The fact that you've allowed corporations to build incredible wealth, individuals without paying taxes, that wealth is concentrated in a few hands. That wealth is not in the hands of the people for spending and disposable income. There's no way that a person worth $1 trillion is going to spend the same as if individuals had $1 trillion in their hands to spend. The large accumulation of wealth is counter to many of the laws that will allow individuals to prosper. Mr. Friedman. The government has basically created this inflationary problem. The fact that they could control the individuals and basically stop or diminish the spending required for the economic engine by requiring isolation during the pandemic created great problems for the economy. Nobody truly understood what they were doing, or perhaps they did. But when certain decisions were made, they were indeed creating this problem that you're referring to as inflation. Inflation will destroy any country. It destroys your purchasing power. Your savings have less value. The money that you put away for retirement is not going to cover your retirement. And the country is going to have to pay for your social needs in your elderly years. Inflation must be controlled. And the government knows how to do it. And they must take the steps that are required.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Would each of you like to please give us a closing message?
We'll start with Mr. Smith. I know that many people think that since I lived in the 18th century, that my ideas must be old-fashioned and outdated. And yes, they are outdated in many ways. The key, I think, to successful economies are that free markets are allowed to work. Today, the governments attempt to see how many ways they can interfere with the markets. But supply and demand are the great motivators for free economies. It is very important that the governments allow markets to work and that they do not allow inflation and debt to destroy the country. So thank you for allowing me to speak. I truly appreciate the opportunity. Mr. Keynes. The concept of supply and demand is the foundation of economic success. Intervention into the market structure generally creates major problems. The individuals making the decisions often have no idea the problems that they create. The politicians have created a huge national debt that generations are going to have to solve. The stupidity of some of the decisions that have been made politically will require drastic actions in the near future. The sooner the politicians face up to the responsibility of solving the problems, the less generations that will be affected in the future. Mr. Friedman, I would like to thank you for the opportunity. I hope that the politicians and the governmental structure takes advice and learns from their mistakes. The governments of the United States and the other democracies have made many mistakes in the last 20 years. Huge national debts will destroy countries. It must be addressed. You cannot spend 70% of your income servicing a debt and have the money that you require to do what is needed to make a country prosper. A country must provide the United States especially must have a strong military, take care of its infrastructure, have a social net for people that are in need, and have a medical program system that individuals can afford. If they do not accomplish those goals, then the United States will flounder into the future, and they will find that they're being overtaken by many other countries. Democracies have got to prove that they're more effective than autocracies. Sometimes the autocracies appear to win, but if the government stays out of trade and makes less decisions concerning how Americans must live, the United States can prosper far into the future. It's truly in the hands of the government. It must be reduced in size, and it must be reduced in influence concerning the financial structure of the country. So thank you for allowing me to speak. I really appreciate it. And if you would like to discuss this further, I'm sure that we would be available. Okay. Thank you to all three of the guests tonight. Connie and I have started a new podcast. It's called Hello Heaven. We broadcast it on YouTube and Facebook Live Fridays at 6 p.m. Pacific time. The audio is available on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Alexa, and most of the other platforms that are available. My 10th book, Modern Messages of the Archangels, is available for purchase. You can get it in softcover, hardcover, audiobook, and ebook. If you want a signed copy, you need to go to barrystrom.com, and that is the only place that you can get the book with a signature in it. Connie?
Thank you for joining us tonight on Channeling History. This week we brought you some great information about the economics that will control the future. These are dangerous times, and the decisions you make today will determine your future. We always try to bring you the truth about history by speaking to the souls that live the events. It's only by understanding the events of the past that you can properly prepare for the future. God bless you all. Have a wonderful week.
Indeed. These are definitely dangerous times. We've been trying to bring you some of the best spirits from the past, the most knowledgeable politicians, economists. We're trying to bring you information that will help you in your lives. So thank you for tuning in. Tell your friends about us, and we will be back next week.
Thanks for listening to Channeling History. Tune in again next week for another electrifying episode, as we never know who will make an appearance or who will come through the portal. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2020. Our Story Begins by Kevin MacLeod Licensed through Incompetech.com.